We've got folks coming in from the waiting room, and we'll give everybody a minute to get on the line before we get started. All right, it looks like our waiting room has calmed down a little bit. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program application support webinar. Before we get started, I just wanted to make you aware that this Teams call is being recorded and may be posted on DOE's website or used internally. If you do not wish to have your voice recorded, please do not speak during the call. If you do not wish to have your image recorded, please turn off your camera and participate by phone. If you speak during the call or use a video connection, you are presumed consent to recording and use of your voice or image. So now that we have that covered, thanks again for joining us today. My name is Kate Donatelli, and I'm a project officer with the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, or EECBG for short. I'm joined today by my colleagues Allison Robinson and Kit Erding, and today we're going to provide you with some inspiration to get you across the application finish line by October 31st. And we're also going to address some commonly asked questions about the EECBG program and application process. Next slide, please. We're going to cover a number of topics today. First, we'll go over some basics about the EECBG program. Then we'll review application steps and deadlines. After that, we'll provide some guidance on how to decide between the two application pathways, grants and vouchers. Then we'll answer some common questions about the program and application process, and we'll also review award requirements. At the end, we'll guide you towards some helpful resources, and of course, we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to enter your questions into the chat as we go along. Next slide, please. All right, let's start off with some basics about the EECBG program. Next slide. We'll begin with a few key reminders that we want you to take away from today's webinar. So the first is to please be aware of your application deadline. Applications for local governments are due on October 31st, 2024, and tribal applications are due on May 31st, 2025. As you work on your application, please make sure you're using the right platform. So traditional grants should use the Page platform, while voucher applicants should use the application portal on the voucher website. The second thing we ask is that you confirm you've selected the appropriate application type. Later in today's webinar, we'll talk about the difference between the grant and the voucher options. But if you leave today's session thinking that you'd like to switch from a traditional grant to a voucher or vice versa, there's still time to do that. We just ask that you submit these requests to change by October 15th. Finally, one of the most important takeaways from today's webinar is that we have an absolute wealth of resources to support you as you complete your application, including one-on-one assistance, application guidance documents, office hours, and more. Next slide, please. So we wanted to provide you with a quick snapshot of how the EECBG program is doing so far. EECBG program applicants have been hard at work over the last several months to develop and submit their applications. And as of today, we've received over 1,100 applications, the majority of which, as you can see on this slide, came from local governments. Of those 1,100 applications, we have approved 233 awards across our program, and 177 of these were from local governments whose median award size was $291,000. So these are huge numbers, and we're already starting to see the impact of the EECBG program on the ground in communities, and we're really looking forward to seeing this continue. Local governments are choosing to pursue a wide variety of topics, the most popular being municipal energy upgrades, energy planning and strategy development, energy audits, and renewable energy installations. These projects represent just a small subset of eligible uses for EECBG program funds, which we will cover on the next slide. All right, so one of the greatest things about the EECBG program is its flexibility. There are 14 categories of eligible uses for EECBG program funds, which range from strategy development, clean energy deployment, and the other categories you can see on this slide. You can use your funds community-wide, so you're not limited to government buildings and facilities, although this is a very popular choice. The funds can be deployed throughout your community. And additionally, local governments and tribes can fund both clean energy projects, such as building retrofits or renewable energy installations, as well as programs, such as financing programs, public education campaigns, or workforce development. And on the next slide, we'll see how local governments are pursuing innovative and impactful projects across these categories. So we can go ahead to the next slide. So before we get into the nitty gritty of the application process, we wanted to start off with a few inspiring examples of local governments that have already received their awards. So we're going to go over just 2 of the over 200 applications of awards that EECBG has made to date. And I would definitely encourage you to check out our website where we keep a running list of awarded grants. It's a really great way to see what other communities are up to. But our first example project comes from Iowa City, Iowa. They used their $136,000 allocation to purchase electric vehicles and an electric bike. Iowa City's AmeriCorps team will use the battery electric vehicle light-duty trucks as they provide free home energy audits and weatherization services across their community. They also purchased an electric bike, which has allowed their police bike patrol to expand further into the community. Next slide, please. Our next example comes from Livermore, California. They used their $144,000 allocation to purchase 2 dual-port solar EV chargers. And the really cool thing about these chargers is that they can be operated off the grid with solar and battery storage. They placed the chargers at City Hall and the public library they'll be publicly available to the community. Both Livermore and Iowa City used the equipment rebate voucher option for their project. So let's go to the next slide where we'll talk exactly about what that is and how it differs from a traditional grant. All right, so as I mentioned at the top, EECBG program applicants have 2 options for accessing their funds: traditional grants and vouchers. Most of you on this webinar have probably already selected your preferred option at this point. However, as we get closer to the deadline, it's important to ensure that you selected the option that works best for your community. And as I mentioned, there's still time for you to make a change if you need to. So option number 1 is the traditional grant, which can be used across all 14 eligible use categories and provides the most flexibility. Option number 2 is the voucher option, which can be used to access equipment rebates, technical assistance, or both. It provides a streamlined application and simplified reporting requirements compared to the traditional grant. So later on in this presentation, we'll dig much deeper into the difference between these 2 options and why you might choose one over the other. But for now, we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, so whether you've already started your application or if you're almost ready to submit, there are tons of DOE resources to guide you through wherever you are in the application process. If you're still determining how you want to use your community's EECBG allocation, the resources on this slide are for you. So as a very first step, you'll need to look at our allocation list to determine how much your community is eligible to receive, and review our program guidance to become familiar with eligible activities. Next, we want you to get inspired. We have several resources available to spark inspiration for all kinds of projects, including projects that are particularly streamlined and have simple reporting requirements, an awards page where you can check out descriptions of all the awards we made so far and filter by topic, location, and funding amount, and project blueprints, which provide step-by-step guidance for 13 shovel-ready, impactful projects. If you need an eligibility check, we can help with that as well. So a general caveat is that we can't provide formal confirmation of your project's eligibility without seeing your full application. But if you have questions along the way about your project's eligibility, feel free to reach out to us and we can make sure you're on the right track. And there are several ways that you can do that. The first is that our team holds office hours twice a week. You can bring any questions to these sessions, including questions about project eligibility. Our partners at the International City County Managers Association, or ICMA, are also available to provide free one-on-one support with your application. And once you have a defined project idea, you'll be ready to apply. So let's go to the next slide where we talk about some resources we have available to get you through the application process. All right, so applying for a federal grant can be a huge undertaking. We understand that, and to that end, we've put together several resources to help you through the process. So our first category is that we have several desk reference documents, including example applications and an application guide that's coming soon to walk you through some common questions. We also have slides and recordings from all of our past webinars on our website. These can be a great reference for you. The slides and recording of this webinar will be available soon and can hopefully be a helpful point of reference as you complete your application. There are also a couple of ways to connect with DOE, including through office hours and our general inbox. We're always happy to triage your questions. I will say the earlier you submit these questions, the more capacity that we'll have to answer them, especially as we get closer to that October 31st deadline. So please do get your questions in early. Lastly, as I mentioned on the previous slide, ICMA is able to provide that free one-on-one application support, and you can sign up using the link on this slide. Next slide, please. So who exactly should you contact if you have a question? Our EECBG program general inbox is always a great place to start. Their email address is here. But if you have a specific question about your application, who you should contact depends on the kind of application you are pursuing. So if you picked the traditional grant option, you're going to be assigned to a project officer based on your geographic region. And if you refer to the map on this slide, you can figure out who the project officer assigned to you might be. So as you can see, I'm the project officer for the Northeast region. So if you're located in any of those orange states, please do not hesitate to reach out to me with questions. Our other project officers around the country are also more than happy to assist with any questions you may have. If you are pursuing a voucher, you will not be working with the project officers listed on this slide. Instead, you should contact the voucher inbox listed on this slide, the voucher specific email address. This inbox is managed by a team of lovely people that we will see on the next slide. We can advance to that. Thank you. And what we really want to stress is that there are real people behind these inboxes. So when you reach out to the voucher team inbox, my teammates Alvaro, Allison, Melissa, and Shay will be the ones answering your questions. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Allison to walk us through the decision-making process of deciding between a grant and a voucher.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, like Kate said, this is our voucher team at DOE. So when you're emailing that DL-EECBG vouchers at hq.doe.gov, it's not going anywhere crazy. It's going directly to the four of us. And we do our best to stay on top of the many emails we receive daily. Also note that we're supported by our rebate and portal administrator, ICF, who handles all technical issues related to the voucher application portal, in addition to application outreach and support for equipment rebates. Next slide, please. All right, so let's dive into the grant and voucher options. Next slide, please. So deciding between a grant versus a voucher. So we'll note that there's no limit on the size of the allocations that can pursue a voucher, but they are ideal for allocations that are around $250,000 or less. And vouchers are a great option for local and tribal governments who may have limited capacity to manage a federal grant, or those who have minimal experience with federal grants. Vouchers are a good fit for projects with clearly defined technical assistance and/or equipment needs. On the other hand, grants allow for maximum flexibility, so it's a great option if you plan to pursue multiple projects or projects that have multiple components. If your project is going to require significant staff time, grants would be a better fit there. They're also ideal for projects that involve programmatic or financing work. I'll note that you can still pursue technical assistance under the grants. You would just be procuring your own provider. So if you have a specific provider in mind that you would like to work on for receiving technical assistance for your EECBG project, we definitely recommend you choose the grant option because you're in charge of the procurement process, while for technical assistance vouchers, DOE is providing a technical assistance administrator, and we'll talk about that more later. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we're going to do a voucher deep dive. So vouchers that are for equipment rebates, they're for the reimbursement to entities for the purchase and installation of energy-related equipment that is used to meet program goals. So that's installation, HVAC upgrades, EVs, EV chargers, solar panels, all of those projects that Kate noted under the eligibility slide earlier. Your application should include details on your project, including the equipment type and address of installation. If it's a vehicle, it's just where that vehicle will normally be stored. So you do not need to provide any specific model information, and then bids are also not required at the time of application, but you're more than welcome to provide those specific equipment details and bids if you have them at time of application. Once DOE approves the application and you've signed the terms and conditions, your 2-year project period begins and you can begin purchasing any equipment. You are not able to purchase equipment before that DOE approval. Upon completion of your project, so once you've purchased all the equipment and it's all installed, you'll log back into the voucher application portal and you'll submit the required documentation for DOE approval. So that's the invoice, some report requirements, photos of your installed equipment. Once DOE approves the project for payment, the reimbursement is issued to the bank account that is tied to Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI. So that's why we require a UEI number, because that's where the money is going. Vouchers for technical assistance will be used to access support from experts across a wide array of high-value opportunities in energy efficiency, renewable energy, transportation, and other energy-related areas. Your application should include as much detail as you're able to share on your technical assistance needs so we can connect you with the best qualified provider. After your application is approved, DOE will assign a TA provider to your project. And you will work with this TA provider to finalize the scope of work, which will outline the assistance you will receive and for what amount. We know some of you might be interested in splitting your allocation between technical assistance and the equipment rebate vouchers, which is definitely allowed. I also want to emphasize that 8 hours of scoping is free to you, and it's not counted towards your allocation amount. After DOE approves the scope of work, you will begin to receive the technical assistance from your chosen provider. And the TA provider will prepare all required reporting and invoices for your review before submitting to DOE. So this is a great option if you have planning needs, community outreach needs, strategy development, but you do not have the bandwidth to procure your own technical assistance provider. So we also want to note for technical assistance vouchers that the entities do not receive any funds. Instead, you're receiving your allocation in the form of technical assistance services. Next slide, please. All right, so it was noted earlier that if you're switching from a voucher to a grant or a grant to voucher, we would like that request to be sent to us by October 15th. It does take a lot to process a switch on our end. There's many components. It's not instantaneous. So as soon as you can let us know if you're interested in switching, that allows maximum time for us to process the switch and to getting that done in good time before you submit your application. And so again, if you're applying for a voucher, you're using the voucher application portal. If you're applying for the traditional grant, you're using the page system for grants. And so here are the steps outlined on how you switch. You all should have submitted, ideally, a pre-award information sheet to our inbox, which is eecbg@hq.doe.gov. However, I'll note if you have not submitted a pre-award information sheet and you want to pursue a voucher, you're actually able to just register directly in the portal, so you don't have to fill out that information twice. If you previously filled out a pre-award information sheet and switching from grant to voucher, we will pre-register you based on the information in your pre-award information sheet. So please reach out if you have additional questions on this process. We're here to help you. Next slide, please. So now we're going to discuss some common EECBG program questions. Next slide, please. So here's some misconceptions versus reality for the application, just general application requirements. So we want to emphasize that EECBG funding is non-competitive. There's no cost share requirement. This funding has been allocated to you to use as you see fit for an energy efficiency specific project. And while we know that the allocations do feel small, and it may feel like it's too small to create a meaningful project, we want to emphasize that there's a lot of flexibility and a lot you can do, including examples like investing in micromobility, such as purchasing e-bikes or just regular old bicycles, or upgrading lighting in, let's say, a community center or other building. We also want to note that we have received over 350 applications from entities whose allocations are less than 80,000. So there is a lot of possibilities to scale a project to your allocation size. Again, we want to encourage entities to pursue a voucher since that option was designed to support these small scale projects. Another misconception is that the project must be in a Justice 40 community. That's not true. As long as the project is happening within the bounds of your entity, so whether the county or the city lines, that means it's eligible. So there's not a location-specific requirement. We also want to clarify a misconception about Build America, Buy America. If your allocation is 250,000 or less, there is a blanket waiver exemption. So you do not have to submit any additional paperwork or comply with Build America, Buy America if your allocation is 250,000 or less, which is a great thing for these smaller projects. And then we do know that federal grants can feel really overwhelming for a small staff to manage. There are several project options with minimal reporting requirements that don't require Davis-Bacon or compliance with NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. And so we're happy to work with you to tailor a project that meets your staff's bandwidth. We also want to note that you can increase the size of your allocation by teaming with a neighboring entity and pooling your allocation. We currently have Memphis and Shelby County, Tennessee teaming on zoo upgrade projects, which is pretty exciting. And that means that you and your teammate have access to the full size of both of your combined allocations. And you only have to submit one application and reporting for just one set for both of you. So that can also be a great option for folks. And then we want to make sure that you know that EECBG is not renewable energy specific. So you saw earlier the 14 different categories. So you can see the wide range of flexibility of project types. It's not limited to any type of energy. It's all about energy efficiency and investing in your community. So there's several options to reduce energy that don't involve fuel switching. So not switching from gas to electric. And you can see some examples on this slide. Upgrading your HVAC, LEDs, adding insulation, new windows. But of course, you know, renewable energy projects are eligible, like rooftop solar, and definitely a great project idea. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk about some misconceptions of the energy efficiency and conservation strategy. We find that some folks feel like the word strategy gives this document wait, like this is a strategy. We're going to be following up on you and making sure you're implementing it. So no. So first we want to say you do not need a comprehensive plan. What we're looking for in the EECS is at least one goal for increasing energy efficiency, and then a plan on how your EECBG project is going to support this goal. So if your goal is to reduce energy by 30% and you're installing LEDs at a community center to reduce the energy use of that building, that's a great example of what we're looking for in an EECS. The goals don't have to be lofty. The example goal here is you can just reduce municipal building energy use by 5%. That may feel like a more manageable goal for you. So we're really trying to be flexible so that the goal can really be reflective of your community needs. And you can definitely leverage any existing plans that you have. Even if the plans aren't firm or in the works, that's fine with us. We also don't require that your EECS should be ratified. You should just follow the guidance from your own bylaws, but we are not requiring any ratification. Additionally, we want to emphasize that we're not going to measure how you implemented your EECS. We're not going to ask for updates after your project period. You're just going to follow reporting requirements on project impacts as noted by your project officer or from the voucher team. So hopefully that gives you a bit of reassurance about your EECS. Next slide, please. I'm going to provide some clarification on new builds and new construction. So if you're constructing a new building and you want to put in LED lighting, we love that. However, that's not an eligible project. So this is a program that's all about saving energy. So all EECBG funded activities must result in energy savings. And the primary goal of this program is to promote energy efficiency and conservation in existing buildings and facilities. The programs promoting energy efficiency are eligible, such as if you're thinking about establishing benchmarking systems, adopting green building standards, training code inspectors, if you're implementing a remote work program that's going to save energy because folks aren't commuting. Those are all examples of programs that are eligible. So we really encourage you to view the eligible activities and program guidance that we have on our application hub that goes into great detail about projects that are eligible. We also have FAQs that you can review for more information. And of course, you can always email eecbg@hq.doe.gov with any questions. Next slide, please. So now we're going to shift to some common questions on the application process. I see we have a hand raised. Just note that we will get to Q&A later in this presentation. Next slide, please. I'm going to dive into the voucher application steps. So what to expect? So we talked a lot about the application earlier. And so after you submit your application, we will review, and this takes about 30, 60 days. It really depends on if your application is missing any information, but we do try and stick to the 30 days as close as possible for review so that we're not preventing you from starting your project. Once your application is approved and the terms and conditions are signed, that begins your project period. You do have 2 years from that approval date to complete your project. However, you can extend for another year at no cost if needed. After completion of your project, you'll submit final reporting and other paperwork requirements like images of your installed equipment and your invoice. And then DOE will review that for approval. Once it's approved for payment, that occurs within 45 days of the DOE approval for payment. Then we hope you celebrate your great work. So sort of related, but different note for technical assistance. You're working with that DOE provided TA administrator. And after they complete their technical assistance project, or you've reached 100% of your allocation, they will finalize the reports and invoice. And so you'll review before they come to DOE. So there shouldn't be any surprises. And then any deliverables that you've created as part of your technical assistance project will be uploaded to the voucher application portal. our applicable portal if there's somewhere else they need to go. And then again, we encourage you to celebrate. It's a lot of work to participate in these programs. All right, next slide, please. So I've talked a lot about the application portal, so I want to make sure that we go over how to access it. So I mentioned earlier that if you previously submitted a pre-award information sheet, we will pre-register you in the portal. You'll receive an email from noreply@salesforce.com, and that will give you instructions on setting up your password and completing the login. And then please email our portal administrator at EECBG Vouchers@ICF.com. They can handle any technical issues like access issues. So if you haven't submitted a pre-award information sheet, do not worry, you do not need to. You can just register directly in the portal. We want to note that you should have your unique entity identifier on hand when you go to register. Again, this is how we pay our equipment rebate voucher projects. And so if you need to create one, we encourage you to go to sam.gov. And so it can take a couple weeks to get a UEI, so definitely that should be your next step if you haven't submitted a pre-award information sheet and you don't have a UEI. So again, reminder, this is for folks who have not submitted a pre-award information sheet. So we understand no technology is perfect. There might be issues or questions about using the portal and accessing it. So again, please email our portal team at EECBGVouchers@ICF.com. They do a great job of providing prompt assistance. And the EECBG program team can help with questions about application process and program requirements. But in terms of technical issues with the portal, it really needs to go to the ICF team. All right, thank you. And next slide. So I've talked a lot about the portal. This is what it looks like. So here is the URL that you can go to access it, and you can see there's a registration tab at the top. So that's how you're going to register. And this is also where you'll be submitting not only your initial application, but also the majority of the reporting requirements and the post-installation paperwork. Please note that this is separate from page where applications for the traditional grants are submitted. Next slide. So we're going to dive into what the application actually looks like in the portal. So the first step is that energy efficiency conservation strategy. So we just covered some misconceptions about that. So I also want to note that you can complete it in the portal. So don't worry if you have not worked on this separately, you can just fill it out in the portal and it'll combine all of your answers together into an EECS. However, if you've already completed your EECS, you can just upload it into the portal. We encourage you to review the EECS template and example EECSs on our application hub so you can understand what's required and you can see what other folks have submitted. We just want to emphasize that the EECS is just a few questions and they include multiple choice responses. And so as I noted before, DOE is not tracking the implementation of your EECS. Next slide, please. After you complete your EECS, you'll put in information about your project, and we just want to emphasize that you should choose the option or options that most closely align with your project. So you'll see there are a lot of drop down, a lot of options here. So for example, if you are upgrading lighting in a municipal owned building, that's sector local government, but if you're doing upgrades in a school, you'd want to choose K through 12 schools. And again, if you have questions on what category your project is in, we really encourage you to look at the eligibility guidance because it breaks it down really nicely. Next slide, please. You'll fill out a budget summary. And so there's just a couple categories here. We have equipment, supplies, internal personnel. So that's the staff. That's city or county staff who's installing the equipment. And then we have third-party contractors. So that's if you hire someone, like an HVAC technician or a lighting contractor. So we want to note that if you do select other direct costs, we will need you to provide details so we understand what those costs are and we can make sure that they're eligible. And then if you're purchasing something like software, that should be categorized as supplies. Next slide, please. Then you'll select your program metrics. And so we just encourage you to think about your project and only select the metrics that best align with your project. That's because you'll be asked to report on metrics during project closeout, so you don't want to be surprised by some metrics that maybe don't apply to your project. I'll also note that it's okay if you're not sure when you're filling this out. We are able to update your application for you as your project changes. If that happens, if you're changing location or equipment type. So just if you have any changes after you submit the application, just reach out to the portal administrator and they can get that information updated for you. Next slide. So one of our last application sections is compliance, and this includes signing the Davis-Bacon Act Assurance Letter. So we'll be covering Davis-Bacon later, so don't worry. But we want to note that all applications do require the signature of the Davis-Bacon Act Assurance Letter, even if you believe Davis-Bacon will not apply to your project. So this is just saying that you understand that Davis-Bacon Act requires you pay contractors at least the prevailing wage of your county. That's noted on the federal website. So just want to make sure that folks understand that this is a requirement and what Davis-Bacon is for. And we'll be covering Davis-Bacon much more later. Next slide. We're now going to discuss award requirements, so I will turn it back over to Kate.
Thanks, Allison. So in this section, we're going to cover application steps for the traditional grant option. So we can go to the next slide. Here's what you can expect from the traditional grant application process at a high level. So there are 4 parts to the process: application development, application review, award negotiation, and the post-award process. So your first step is going to be, again, indicating your intention to apply by submitting a pre-award information sheet. This is a step that many of you have completed already. Then you'll submit your application through Page, our online platform. After you submit, your application will receive an initial screening for completeness. And after we confirm that your application is complete, we'll enter the award negotiation phase. So during this phase, we'll carefully review the technical and financial aspects of your application. We may also conduct additional NEPA review if that's applicable to your project. And during the awards negotiation phase, you may receive questions from several members of our team, including your project officer, fellows, and members of our financial assistance or NEPA teams. It's very common to receive questions regarding your application, so please don't be alarmed if we reach out to you after you submit. And we encourage you to respond to these questions in a timely manner to keep your application moving along. Once we complete award negotiations, the next step is to award your grant. So a DOE contracting officer will actually award your grant and produce an award package that includes the assistance agreement, terms and conditions, and a checklist of reporting requirements. We conduct kickoff calls with all new grantees to review these materials with you. And then after all that hard work, you get to celebrate and look forward to bringing these funds to your community. Next slide, please. So over the next couple of slides, we're going to dig into each traditional grant application component in a little more detail. Some of this might sound familiar to what you heard Allison describe, but there are some important distinctions between the traditional grant and voucher application processes. So again, there are those pre-application steps of submitting a pre-award information sheet and getting set up in Page. Many of you at this point have already completed these steps and you have Page accounts set up, but I did want to flag one important change, which is that in August, the Page system implemented a new login process that requires you to authenticate with either a login.gov or an ID.me account. You will not be able to access your application in Page without one of these accounts. So if you have not logged into Page in a while, I would encourage you to complete this step as soon as possible and confirm that you're still able to access your account. The last thing we would want is for you to be a week out from the deadline and find out that you can't get into your account anymore. So once you're set up in the page system, you can start actually preparing your application. And there are a few key components of a traditional grant application. We have the application for federal assistance, or SF424, which provides high-level information about you as the applicant and your proposed activities. We also ask for a detailed budget and an energy efficiency and conservation strategy, which Allison covered before. We also look for activity files where you'll illustrate each individual activity you plan to pursue with EECBG program funds. And finally, there are some supporting documentation and attachments that we ask you to include. I want to highlight again the resources that are available to support you through this process. We talked about how to contact our general inbox or your specific project officer, as well as the support available from ICMA. If you're new to the page system, I would also encourage you to check out a webinar we held that walks through how to use the platform in more detail. The page hotline email is also a great place to go for any technical issues you may have, like you've lost your password or you need help getting access to your account. So on the next few slides, we're going to preemptively go over some of the commonly asked questions about the application process. So we can move to the next slide. So the budget is one section where we get a lot of questions. So let's go over a few of them now. First of all, when you open the budget, you'll see line items for several different things like personnel costs, equipment costs, contracts, etc. You only need to complete the line items that are relevant to your project. So for instance, if your project will be carried out entirely through contracts, that's the only section of the budget that you need to complete. Another common question is how to record supply and equipment costs. The equipment and supply section of your budget should only be used for items purchased directly by you, the grantee. So for instance, if you plan to purchase a heat pump and the cost of that heat pump is incorporated into an installation contract, the entire cost of that contract should be recorded in the contract section of your budget, and the equipment field would be left blank. Another important distinction is how to draw the line between supplies and equipment. So equipment is typically anything with a per unit cost greater than $5,000, a useful life of more than a year, whereas supplies have a per unit cost under that threshold, less than $5,000. We also get a lot of questions about procurement. So please note, we don't expect you to have started a procurement process before applying, but we will need you to provide sufficient detail in your application to help us assess the basis of cost. So you can do this by providing pricing from past projects, doing some market research, or providing quotes if you have them available. This kind of supporting documentation can be included as an attachment to your application. So just in closing, here are a few more tips and tricks to help you complete your budget. As we discussed, equipment or supplies acquired through a contract should be listed in the contract section of your budget. Second, if you plan to include fringe benefits in your budget, we ask that you please list the kinds of benefits you provide or attach a copy of your fringe benefit policy. And finally, any supplies purchased with your grant should be used exclusively for EECBG activities. All right, let's go to the next slide and talk about the activity file. So the activity file is where you'll tell us in detail about the projects and programs you plan to carry out with EECBG program funds. While at least one activity file is required per application, you may find that you need more than one because each distinct activity you plan to pursue should have its own activity file. So for example, if you plan to use your funds to do weatherization and install an EV charger, that would require 2 activity files. There are also a few fields in the activity file that commonly trip people up, and I just wanted to flag for you. So the first is field number 5 in the activity file, which asks for estimated energy savings. Please note that this field is optional at the application stage. However, you may be asked to provide more energy savings information through your regular reporting. Field 6 asks for a description of your project. Please be as detailed as possible about how your project will be carried out and your objectives for that activity. In field 9, you'll provide a budget for the specific activity. This budget should be comprehensive and include all federal funds, outside sources of funding, and leveraged funding that are applicable to that activity. You should also make sure that the activity-specific budgets in your activity files align with the overall project budget section of your application so that we can connect the dots between the two. Finally, I wanted to spend a second talking about Field 7, which asks for project milestones. So in this section, you'll outline the incremental steps required to complete your project. The table on this slide is a great example of how the milestones should be formatted. They provide a sense of timing, as well as a sense of scope for the project. So for example, we plan to retrofit 3 buildings or install 10 solar panels, and here's how long we think it will take us to do that. We'll refer back to these milestones in your regular performance reporting, so please make sure that they're clear, they're measurable, and they're realistic. Next slide, please. All right, so the activity file also asks about process metrics. Allison covered this a little bit. The bottom line is we're not asking you to identify specific reporting metrics for your project in advance. Instead, you'll select a general category of metrics that will be used later on for reporting. We call this a metric area. So just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, the box on the right-hand side of the screen has examples of process metrics. So if you select the retrofit metric area, you may be asked to report on things like the number of buildings retrofitted or energy management systems installed. Next slide, please. All right, now that we've gone over the application requirements, let's talk about what happens once you actually have your award in hand. So in this section, we'll review award requirements and your responsibilities as an EECBG program grantee. And we'll start on the next slide with responsibilities for our traditional grant applicants. So it's important that you read through all of your award materials and that all key personnel are familiar with the laws, regulations, policies, and terms and conditions of the award. We ask that you maintain robust internal controls and thorough financial and programmatic records. We ask that you submit payment requests and reports on time and notify DOE of any changes to your project or issues that arise. It's also the grantee's responsibility to be on the lookout for any instances of fraud, waste, and abuse. Next slide, please. So our expectations for voucher recipients are actually very similar. You'll notice a lot of the same responsibilities listed here. One key difference is that voucher recipients will use the voucher portal to submit their reimbursement requests as well as required reporting. As always, you should notify the voucher team if anything about your project changes or if any issues arise. And just to wrap it up, while project officers and voucher teams are here to help you navigate the award requirements, it's ultimately the grantee's responsibility to make sure that they're up to speed and up to date with everything that's required of them. Next slide, please. Okay, so over the next few slides, we'll go over some common questions about compliance, starting with that terms and conditions document. So a common question we get is, can I see the terms and conditions in advance? We're happy to provide you with a sample upon request, but please note, these documents are highly customized based on the receiving entity and their proposed activities. We're happy to provide them to you, this sample document to you to give you a sense of what it will look like. But traditional grant applicants will not receive their terms and conditions until after their award is made. Voucher applicants have a little bit more flexibility. They can either accept the terms and conditions at the time that they apply or after DOE approves their application. Another important thing to note is that the terms and conditions are pretty inflexible. So while you are welcome to propose edits, it's pretty unlikely that DOE is going to accept any changes to the terms and conditions document. Next slide, please. Okay, another area of compliance that we've already heard a little bit about is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. All EECBG program grantees are required to comply with NEPA. So how can you actually make sure you're compliant? The first step is to submit a statement of work with your application. So luckily, this is not something you need to write yourself, as DOE has already produced 4 statement of work templates that cover a variety of project scenarios. We often get questions about, do I need to submit a NEPA statement of work if there's no ground disturbance? The answer is yes, and we've developed a specific statement of work template for exactly this scenario. And then similarly, if the ground has already been disturbed, like in an example where you're adding an EV charger to an existing parking lot, you still would need to submit that statement of work, and we have a template for that. While most of our applicants are going to submit a NEPA statement of work with their application using one of the 4 DOE prepared templates. There are a few cases where a project might fall outside of the statement of work templates. So for example, if you are pursuing a very unique project that is not specifically included in the statement of work templates, or if you plan to install a solar PV system with a capacity larger than 60 kilowatts, or if you are a tribal organization planning to complete a ground disturbing project, you might fall into this category. So in these rare cases, the applicant would submit a different form called an EQ1 and undergo additional NEPA review. If you think you might fall into that category, please contact your project officer or their voucher team, and we can guide you on next steps. But the bottom line is that most applicants should be using those NEPA statement of work templates. Next slide, please. All right, so our next area of compliance is Build America, Buy America. Allison already mentioned that this is only applicable to those receiving more than $250,000 through this grant. Those of you that are receiving under that amount do not need to comply. But for those of you that will need to comply with BABA, let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. So we're often asked, what kind of equipment purchases will trigger BABA requirements? And generally speaking, Build America, Buy America applies to articles, materials, and supplies that are consumed in, incorporated into, or permanently affixed to a public infrastructure project. So in practice, this means things like HVAC systems, LED lights, heat pumps, solar PV systems, EV charging stations, and the like. There are also a few notable exceptions to be aware of. So we already talked about that $250,000 waiver. Another one to be aware of is that while EV charging infrastructure is subject to Build America, Buy America, actual electric vehicles themselves are not. And then finally, Build America, Buy America does not apply to any private infrastructure projects. So for example, if you are planning to run a residential low-income weatherization program, the equipment installed in those private homes would not trigger BABA. This slide has some great links to additional resources if you want to learn more about Build America, Buy America. But for now, we'll move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about the Davis-Bacon Act. So the Davis-Bacon Act requires that any entity receiving bipartisan infrastructure law funds, which includes our program, meet local prevailing wages for construction, alteration, and repair activities. So any applicants that hire third-party contractors to conduct this work must comply with the Davis-Bacon Act. So if you plan to use a contractor for things like HVAC installation, lighting upgrades, EV chargers, you would need to demonstrate that workers are being paid the prevailing wage. Please note that unlike Build America, Buy America, the Davis-Bacon Act can apply to projects in privately owned infrastructure, depending on the circumstances. This may raise the question, are there any projects that are not subject to the Davis-Bacon Act requirements? And the answer is yes. So for example, if the purchased equipment does not require any installation, like electric vehicles, mobile EV chargers like we saw in Livermore, California, or e-bikes like we saw in Iowa City, those would not be subject to Davis-Bacon. Additionally, if the entity uses in-house staff to perform the work rather than a contractor, that would also not trigger Davis-Bacon Act requirements. We've produced a document that highlights some streamlined projects, including some additional examples of projects that do not trigger Davis-Bacon Act requirements if you're curious to learn more. But now I'll move on to the next slide. All right, now that our brains are full of information about our program, how to apply, and award requirements, let's talk about some new resources that are available to help you navigate this process. Next slide, please. So throughout these slides, we've referred to several guidance documents, application support resources, and opportunities to connect with DOE. And I just want to reiterate a few of those. So we have our great desk reference documents, including example applications, a forthcoming application guide, and recorded webinars and slides, including very soon on our website, the recording and slides of this webinar. Second, please stay connected with us. You can sign up for office hours or reach the DOE team directly through our general inbox, the voucher team inbox, or your specific project officer if you're pursuing a traditional grant. And finally, we have that one-on-one application support from our partners at EECBG. They're very well versed in our application processes and are here to help you. So the bottom line is, we're here to support you throughout the application process and beyond. We encourage you to take full advantage of the available resources, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions. And with that, let's go to the next slide, which brings us to the end of our formal presentation. I hope that this section sparked some questions among the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kit Erdang, who's going to lead our Q&A section.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for that wonderful presentation, Kate and Allison. I'm going to jump right into the questions that we got in the chat. The first question is for Kate, and this was answered in the chat, but I just want to reiterate it. Do you anticipate the end of October deadline being extended at all, and will this funding be available again next year?
Yeah, it's a great question. At this time, we have no plans to extend the deadline, so we encourage you to apply by October 31st. That is our final deadline for local governments. And similarly, this is a one-time allocation, and we don't have plans for future rounds of funding at this time. So we really encourage you to take advantage of the funding you've been allocated now, and we hope to see your application.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. This next question is for Allison. For entities that are going the voucher route, can a unit of local government receive their allocation upfront?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So vouchers for equipment rebates are post-purchase only. It's a reimbursement that allows us to streamline some of the reporting requirements and oversight. So it's a streamlined option, but it also has more limitations. So if you would like to have access to your funding up front, we definitely encourage you to apply for a grant and not a voucher.
Thanks so much, Allison. This next question is going to be for you again, and it's about choosing a TA provider when you pursue the voucher route. So we had a question about if a local electrical utility could be the TA provider, and if DOE assigns their own energy auditor. So if you could answer both of those questions about whether or not during the voucher route, local governments are going to be able to choose their own TA provider.
Yeah, so we previously just talked about the limitations of the equipment rebate voucher. And so now I'll dive into the limitations of the technical assistance voucher, which is you cannot choose your own provider. So if you have a specific provider in mind, we really encourage you to go the grant route. So for technical assistance vouchers, DOE is taking over that procurement process and hiring a technical assistance administrator. So you don't have a choice. However, the intent is to match you with a provider who has the depth and breadth of the subject that you need technical assistance for. So it's not chosen at random. It's intended to be highly tailored technical assistance. So for the example of if you want to work with your local electrical utility, we would really encourage you to go the grant route so that you can work with your chosen provider. I will say if you are looking for energy audits in general, we are able to provide someone who is skilled in conducting energy audits for your project.
Awesome. This next question is for Kate, and it's about purchasing EV chargers. There are kind of two questions here. One is, would you recommend the grant or the voucher option for purchasing EV chargers? And if there was a local government that installed EV charging stations, would they be able to collect revenue from them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really the choice to pursue a grant or a voucher is up to you. Installing an EV charger is an eligible use of both the voucher and the grant options. So it really just comes down to what your community is looking for. I think what we've tried to stress during this webinar is that the voucher option provides a more streamlined application, fewer reporting requirements, and could be a great choice if you're receiving a smaller allocation. So I would definitely encourage you to check out the voucher option. But again, the choice is yours and you could go either way. To your question about charging for the charging infrastructure, if you were to do that, we do ask that you declare any program income that you've made through this grant. And so that's something that you would need to make clear in your application and may have to report on later.
The next question is going to be for Allison. How should I go about estimating the cost of equipment like an EV with an equipment rebate voucher if I'm not going to know the full cost until later?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if your project is just purchasing a number of EVs and you don't have any other components, you can just put all of your allocation in that equipment budget line item. So we've definitely seen that. So hopefully that makes it easy for you. If you really wanted to get specific and you knew, like if you're saying I want a Chevy Bolt or a Ford Lightning, you can just go to the manufacturer's website and they have pricing estimates that you can use.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. This next one is going to be for you again. And it's about what is an eligible use of a technical assistance voucher. Would a climate action plan for the county and an implementation study be eligible uses?
Yes, those are great uses for technical assistance vouchers. I hope you apply for a technical assistance voucher because that would be awesome.
Great. The next question is for Kate, and it's also about eligible uses. Would building a new paved trail be an eligible use of funds?
Sorry. I'm going to give the same caveat that I gave before, which is that we can't provide formal determinations on eligibility without seeing your full application, but we can provide some general guidance. So transportation activities that reduce fuel use, including alternative transportation infrastructure, can be an eligible use of funds. So if you demonstrate to us that the construction of this trail is going to cut down on car usage, certainly that's something that we could consider. I would just encourage you also to think about the other implications of a project of that nature. So constructing a new trail might trigger some additional NEPA review that you should be prepared for. But if you'd like to provide some more specifics about that project, I would encourage you to reach out to either your project officer if you're pursuing a traditional grant, or that vouchers inbox if you plan to pursue a voucher.
Great, thank you, Kate. This next question is for Allison, and it's about the combining of ECBG vouchers with other funds. So if you want to speak to general rules to that more broadly, that would be great. The specific question is about a state energy office grant for EV chargers and how that could be combined with an equipment rebate. But if you want to give any general rules of thumb for how to go about thinking about this, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we definitely encourage folks to stack funding sources. You don't have to limit the funding of your project to just EECBG. I encourage you to check out our blueprints because there is a webinar on financing and identifying other sources of funds, so that might be helpful. And then for the specific example, yes, EECBG could be used as a match. So the double dipping we want to prevent is if you received funding from your state energy office and use that to purchase EV chargers and then also try to have EECBG reimburse you for those same chargers. That's definitely double dipping. But if you're using EECBG as a match to purchase additional chargers beyond what the state energy office is funding, that is an allowed use. And again, as Kate mentioned, we'll always caveat when we're giving guidance, we really are doing our best to provide information to you, but we'll need to see a full application before we can confirm something is 100% eligible.
Thanks so much, Allison. The next question is for Kate, and it's about the EECS or strategy section. And the question is, what if our current facilities master plan doesn't have specific numbers for energy efficiency goals? Can we just identify a goal for the EECS? For example, reduce municipal building energy use by 5% is more specific than reduce energy use.
Yeah, certainly. So in the EECS, we are looking for those measurable goals. And so if you don't have an existing strategy document that has quantifiable goals like that, we encourage you to develop them for the purpose of the EECS. And when you actually fill out this document, you'll see that there's a way to distinguish between these are existing goals that our community has had for a while versus this is a goal that we are developing for the purpose of the EECS. So I think the one example you provided about reducing building energy use by a specific amount would be a great example to use in your EECS.
Great, thank you, Kate. This next question is for Allison. We are under contract with a company for the purchase and installation of equipment, but have yet to make any payments. Is this still eligible under the voucher system?
Yeah, so this is an important question, and I would actually need more information to make a specific determination. So I would encourage whoever submitted this question to email us at either eecbg@hq.doe.gov, or you can email the voucher team directly at dl/eecbgvouchers@hq.doe.gov, and we can gather more information from you so we can provide you a tailored response.
Great, thank you, Allison. This is going to be our last question for today, and this is for Kate. If a council has already awarded a solar project, can the municipality still use EECBG grant funding for that project?
Yeah, I think this is another instance where we'd probably like to talk with you a little bit one-on-one about your specific situation. But as a general rule of thumb, EECBG program funds cannot be used to reimburse any costs that you incurred prior to your application being approved. So that application approval process is important on many fronts because we approve your budget and also other important considerations like the NEPA environmental review. So if you already have like a scoped out project and a contract in place, it probably is a good idea to talk to, again, the vouchers team or your specific project officer if you're pursuing a traditional grant to figure out if EECBG funds would be a good fit.
Great. Thank you so much. That was our last question. As Andy already said in the chat, there are a number of different ways you can reach out to us with your lingering questions that might not have been answered. I know we didn't get through all of them today, but we can definitely work with you to make sure that everyone has the information that they need. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to our wonderful presenters, Kate and Allison. This webinar has been recorded, and the recording and slides will be placed on the website. We'll also email it out to all registrants as soon as we can. We wish you all the best, and please be in touch if you need help with your applications. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.